Malaysia's history is long and detailed. There are records showing that there were early humans living there 1.83 million years ago. So let's have a quick rundown of its history. 40,000 years ago, the first modern humans established themselves in Malaysia. 10,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers settled in Malaysia. A few hundred years later, Stone Age farmers stole the land. Then in 200 CE, state rose up in Malaya, and here on they became more civilized with heavy influence from India. Now we're up to the 1500s, where Malaya is a prominent trading post with a long history, and now a few state sultanates with Malacca being the richest and dominant state. Malay's power soon gave notice to the Portuguese. In 1511, they sent a fleet led by Alfonso de Albuquerque to capture it. This was successful, and now the Portuguese had the powerhouse of Malacca. So with Malacca's power, the Portuguese heavily taxed the local ports, forced Catholicism on the Malays, and attempted to overrule their culture. Malaysia was still just the indigenous, as the Portuguese posed no plans to settle Malaysia, as their only interest was wealth. This benefited the Portuguese by giving them large amounts of wealth while not spending any resources maintaining the state. We know this did not leave lasting impacts because if today you go to Malaysia, only 9% is Christian. But anyway, these acts made the indigenous upset, promoting their heir to Malacca. Here, the Sultanate of Johor was founded. Johor was a resistance to Portuguese Malacca, although this would have proved to be short-lived. By 1600, the Johor Sultanate was one of the most powerful trading states. They made several attempts to recapture Malacca throughout the early 16th century, but 100 years later, Johor made an alliance with the Dutch. That's right, Johor was going to resist the Portuguese by allying with the Dutch. It took 3 sieges to capture Portuguese Malacca, the third siege being finally successful in 1641 after a long, bloody and terrible battle. So what did the Dutch do to Malacca? Nothing. Yep, that's right, nothing. Instead, the Dutch just drove out all the other Europeans from the area, feasting on riches and the power that the powerhouse of Malacca could bring. The Dutch benefited from the wealth, and the Malays benefited from the trade. The interesting part of Malaysia was that up until this point, the only impacts colonization had on Malaysia were very minor, and the culture had not really changed at all. However, that all changed later in the 18th century. Finally, Britain looked to Malaysia, after owning most of India. In 1824, after a lot of disagreement, wars and fights, the British and Dutch divided the region of the Malay Peninsula between them. The Dutch surrendered Malacca to the British. In 1853, the British government stopped charging duty imports of tin. As a consequence, exports of tin from Malaysia to Britain went through the roof. After the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869, this further boosted exports of tin. All was being well until 1871, where the Sultan of Perak died. This resulted in a massive quarrel on whoever should control the mines. This didn't last long though, as one man claimed to be the rightful heir of the Sultan, Raja Abdullah. He made an agreement with the British. If the British recognized Abdullah as the Sultan, in return he would let them have control of the area and let the British be their quote-unquote advisor. In 1895, all protected states were persuaded to form one federation. Up until the Second World War, Britain had total control of Malaysia. In the early 20th century, a new industry rose and grew rapidly: rubber production. The Malayan rubber industry was a boom, growing the Malaysian economy to what it is today. Overall, the British really benefited from the colonization of Malaysia as they had total control and the power of the local people. In 1941, the Japanese invaded the Malay Peninsula, driving out the British. The British basically withdrew its troops, surrendering the land to the Japanese. However, the Japanese hardly did anything to it. They really only used it for power and as a mini-military setup during the World War II. On the 8th of February 1942, they started expanding their power by invading the regions near it. This was a military disaster for the British. No one really benefited from the Japanese colonizing Malaysia, if you can even call that colonizing. In modern-day Malaysia, the only effects from the conquering countries that really applied were that the British made all its states one federation to form one country. After the end of World War II, when Japan was defeated, Malaysia became independent and really after that made their own laws and got no advice from anyone else. So out of all these countries, who benefited from their visit? Really, it was all of them. All Malaysia's conquerors got what they want, or well, most of them, and Malaysia benefited from the Dutch and British protecting them, advising them, and changing laws to help them and themselves. Well, that's the end of the video and I hope you enjoyed it.